Number 1. Kimberly Potter. In April 2021, a tragedy unfolded in Minnesota that made headlines across the United States and sparked intense public debate about policing, training, and accountability. At the center of it was Kim Potter, a police officer who had served for more than 26 years. She was known as calm, disciplined, and experienced. She trained younger officers. She had no prior record of misconduct. But in one split second, during a routine traffic stop, she made a mistake that ended a young man's life and changed her own forever. On April 11, 2021, 20-year-old Dante Wright was driving with his girlfriend, Elena Albrecht Payton, in a white car registered to his brother. It was a normal Sunday afternoon. They planned to go to a car wash. They weren't speeding or acting suspiciously, but their car had an expired registration tag. There was also an air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror, which is illegal under Minnesota law. Officer Kim Potter, along with her trainee, saw the car and decided to pull it over. Potter was supervising the trainee, as she often did. She had done this for years. She knew the job better than most. When the trainee approached the car and spoke with Dante, he discovered that Dante didn't have a driver's license or proof of insurance. When he checked the police database, he learned something more serious. Dante had an outstanding arrest warrant related to an armed robbery case and a protective order connected to a separate incident. Potter and her trainee returned to the vehicle and told Dante he was under arrest. At first, Dante cooperated. He stepped out of the car and stood beside it, but as the officer began to handcuff him, Dante panicked and tried to get back into the driver's seat. His girlfriend shouted his name. The trainee tried to stop him. The situation quickly turned chaotic. Standing close by, Kim Potter moved to help. On her left side was her taser, a device officers use to stop someone without killing them. On her right side was her gun. She reached for her left side, or at least she thought she did, but in the stress and confusion of the moment, her hand went to her right side instead, pulling out her firearm. As Dante continued struggling, Potter shouted, "Taser!" 3 times, warning the other officers. But the weapon in her hand was not a taser. It was her gun. A moment later, she fired a single shot into Dante Wright's chest. The car rolled forward. Dante tried to drive away, but crashed into another vehicle a few blocks away. His girlfriend screamed and cried, calling his name over and over. He died at the scene. Back at the traffic stop, Kim Potter realized what she had done. Bodycam footage captured her collapsing to her knees, shaking and crying. "I grabbed the wrong gun," she said. "I'm going to prison." She looked stunned, horrified, and lost. After 26 years on the job, after hundreds of training hours and years of experience, she had made the mistake officers fear the most. She confused her gun for her taser. The timing of the incident made it even more explosive. It happened during the trial of Derek Chauvin, the officer responsible for George Floyd's death. Minnesota was already in the national spotlight. The public was already angry and mistrustful of police. When Dante's death became public, protests erupted immediately. Crowds gathered outside the Brooklyn Center Police Department. Some demanded Potter's arrest. Others demanded justice for Dante. Potter was first placed on administrative leave, but as the protests escalated, she resigned. The police chief also resigned. The pressure was enormous. Within days, Potter was arrested and charged with first-degree and second-degree manslaughter. Prosecutors argued that she acted recklessly and that someone with her level of experience should have known the difference between a gun and a taser. Her defense argued that it was a tragic mistake, not a crime. They said she was trying to protect her trainee from a dangerous situation. They reminded the jury that tasers and firearms have different weights, grips, and textures, but under stress, the brain can still mix them up. Mistakes happen, they said, even to experienced officers. They showed bodycam footage of Potter collapsing in grief moments after the shooting. The trial took place in December 2021. It was emotional, tense, and closely watched across the country. Dante Wright's family attended every day, grieving the loss of a son, a brother, and a young father. Potter sat in the courtroom pale, shaking at times, struggling to maintain her composure. When she took the stand, she cried as she described the moment she realized what she had done. She said she never meant to harm anyone. She said she thought she was helping her trainee. She said she would never be the same again. But the jury saw things differently. They believed her actions were negligent and that her mistake had deadly consequences. They found her guilty of both counts of manslaughter. It was rare in the United States for a police officer to be convicted for an on-duty shooting, especially one described as accidental. The verdict was hailed as justice by some and criticized by others who believed she had been punished too harshly for a mistake she did not intend. During sentencing, Judge Regina Chu spoke emotionally, saying the case was one of the saddest she had ever handled. She acknowledged the pain of Dante's family, but also recognized Potter's remorse and long service. The prosecution recommended 86 months, but the judge gave her 24 months in prison, with eligibility for supervised release after 16 months. This decision caused outrage among Dante's family, who felt the sentence was far too lenient. His mother, Katie Wright, said, "Kim Potter murdered my son, and the justice system murdered him all over again." Potter began serving her sentence in early 2022. In prison, she kept a low profile, avoiding conflict and spending most of her time reading, praying, and attending classes. Officers watched her carefully, not because she was dangerous, but because she was a former police officer, someone who could be targeted by inmates. Despite the risks, she managed to complete her sentence without major problems. In April 2023, Kim Potter was released after serving the required 16 months. After her release, she began speaking at law enforcement conferences about weapon confusion, high-stress decision-making, and the mistakes that can happen in the field. Some officers appreciated her willingness to speak openly. Others felt she should not profit or gain opportunities from a tragedy that cost a man his life. The Wright family strongly objected to her public appearances, calling them disrespectful and exploitative. Dante Wright's family also reached a settlement with the city for $3.2 million, but no amount of money could replace the young man they lost. Dante left behind a young son who will grow up without his father. As for Kim Potter, she lives with the knowledge that one moment, the wrong movement of her hand, 1 second of confusion, ended a life and changed everything she had built over decades. She once trained young officers. She once represented stability and experience. But now her career is over. Her reputation is broken. And she carries a memory that will follow her forever. Her story is a reminder that in policing, mistakes can be deadly. Training, experience, and good intentions are not always enough to prevent tragedy. 1 second can change everything. And even when there is no hate, no intent, and no malice, accountability still follows. Number 2. Jeronimo Yanez. On July 6, 2016, a quiet evening drive in Falcon Heights, Minnesota, turned into one of the most shocking police shootings ever captured on camera. 32-year-old Philando Castile had just finished work at the Montessori school where he served as a cafeteria supervisor. He was known as Mr. Phil to the kids, someone who handed out extra snacks and remembered every child's allergy by heart. That day, he was driving with his girlfriend, Diamond Reynolds, and her 4-year-old daughter. They were simply going out for groceries. Officer Jeronimo Yanez, a young St. Anthony police officer, had been patrolling the area with his partner. When he saw Philando's car, he believed it matched the description of a vehicle involved in a robbery days earlier. The real suspect was a tall man with dreadlocks. Philando didn't match that description at all, but Yanez focused on something else, a broken tail light. That was enough for a traffic stop. Yanez pulled them over near Larpenteur Avenue. His partner stayed slightly back while Yanez approached the driver's side window. Philando rolled his window down, calm and polite. Diamond Reynolds held her phone, watching the interaction. The little girl sat quietly in the back seat. Yanez asked for Philando's license and registration. Philando nodded, reaching toward his pocket. Then, in a moment that would become one of the most important pieces of this story, Philando calmly said, "Sir, I have to tell you, I do have a firearm on me." He had a legal permit to carry the weapon. He wasn't trying to hide it. He wasn't making sudden movements. He simply followed the law and informed the officer. Dozens of people later testified that Philando was known for respecting rules and making sure he did things correctly. But something shifted in Officer Yanez the moment he heard the word firearm. His pulse jumped. His breathing changed. His voice became tighter. Body cam footage later showed how quickly fear took over his decision-making. He told Philando, "Okay, don't reach for it then." Philando responded, "I'm not pulling it out." Diamond echoed him, "He's not pulling it out." But Yanez became more frantic. In less than 2 seconds, he repeated himself, "Don't pull it out." His voice rose. His hand moved toward his gun. Philando tried to say again, "I'm not pulling it out." Then everything exploded. 7 gunshots. 5 hit Philando Castile. His girlfriend screamed. The little girl began crying. Blood poured onto Philando's shirt as Yanez kept his gun pointed into the car. In the shock of the moment, Diamond did something that changed history. She started a live stream on Facebook. The world watched in real time as Philando lay dying beside her, gasping and bleeding. The video spread everywhere, replayed on news stations, shared by millions, and sparking national outrage. Diamond kept talking into the camera, her voice trembling but steady. She said Philando was only reaching for his wallet, not his gun. She said the officer had overreacted. She begged the world to see what was happening. Meanwhile, the little girl climbed forward, trying to comfort her mother, saying, "It's okay, I'm here with you." On the street, Officer Yanez paced back and forth. His hands trembled, his voice shook. He muttered that he didn't know where the gun was, but the weapon was still in Philando's pocket. He had never touched it. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, but it was too late. Philando Castile died at the scene, still wearing his seatbelt, still holding his papers, still trying to comply with the officer's orders. The case shook the entire country. Thousands protested. People demanded justice. And in the center of it all was a question that still haunts many today. How does a routine traffic stop for a broken taillight end in a man being shot 7 times? Investigators reviewed body cam footage, the Facebook livestream, radio logs, and eyewitness statements. They interviewed officers, community members, and experts. The decision was made to charge Officer Yanez with second-degree manslaughter and 2 counts of dangerous discharge of a firearm. During the trial, the prosecution argued that Yanez acted out of unreasonable fear, not facts. They showed slow-motion footage proving that Philando never grabbed his gun. They showed that Philando calmly explained he had a permit. They pointed out that Philando's girlfriend and her child were inches away when the shots were fired, showing reckless disregard for human life. But the defense argued something different. They said that in police work, decisions happen in fractions of a second. They said Yanez believed Philando was reaching for his gun, not his wallet. They insisted he acted based on what he thought was a deadly threat, even if he was mistaken. They brought in experts to talk about fear, instinct, and how officers are trained to respond when they believe a weapon is involved. The jury deliberated for 5 days, and in June 2017, they found Yanez not guilty on all charges. The verdict stunned many people. Philando's family cried openly in court. Activists called it another example of the justice system failing Black Americans. Some police officers said it was a tragic accident and that Yanez had been put in an impossible position. The debate became national, emotional, and deeply divisive. But beyond the legal arguments, there was the human story of Philando Castile. His co-workers said he knew every child at the school by name. Parents said he paid for kids' lunches out of his own pocket. Friends described him as peaceful, gentle, and patient. More than 10,000 people attended his funeral. He was remembered not as a criminal or a threat, but as a man loved by his community. As for Officer Yanez, he was fired from the police department the same day the verdict came out. He received a small settlement for leaving the force, but he never worked in law enforcement again. His name became tied to one of the most painful police shootings in U.S. history. The Castile case became a symbol. It sparked conversations about concealed carry laws, police training, bias, fear responses, and how officers interpret movements during traffic stops. It forced the country to look at how quickly situations can turn deadly when an officer panics or misjudges a moment. But the saddest part of all is that it happened in front of a child. That little girl saw a man she called Uncle Phil take his last breath. She tried to shield her mother. She whispered words no 4-year-old should ever have to say. Those moments stayed with the world long after the live stream ended. Philando Castile wasn't violent. He wasn't threatening. He was doing exactly what the law required. But a misunderstanding, a tragic, fear-fueled misunderstanding, ended his life. And no amount of debate or explanation can undo that loss. To this day, many people still say his death changed them. It made them afraid of traffic stops. It made them question whether compliance is enough to keep someone safe. It showed how quickly a situation can go from calm to deadly. And in the years since, his name has been repeated in rallies, marches, murals, and calls for reform. Not because he was famous before his death, but because he was ordinary. A regular man living a regular life, taken in an extraordinary and heartbreaking way. Philando Castile's story remains one of the clearest examples of how misjudgment during a traffic stop can destroy families, shake communities, and leave a wound on the nation that never fully heals. Number 3. Christopher Schurr. On the morning of April 4, 2022, 26-year-old Patrick Lyoya was driving through a quiet neighborhood in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It was raining lightly, the streets were slick, and Patrick seemed unsure about which direction to go. Behind him, Officer Christopher Schurr noticed something about the car that caught his attention. The license plate didn't match the vehicle. It was a simple traffic issue, the kind that leads to a ticket, not violence. But what started as a normal stop would end in one of the most controversial police shootings of the decade. Patrick, a refugee from the Democratic Republic of Congo, had lived in the United States for nearly a decade. Friends and family described him as kind, hardworking, and always smiling. He worked odd jobs, supported his parents, and loved spending time with his 2 small children. That morning, he wasn't doing anything strange or suspicious. He was simply driving a car that had a plate registered to a different vehicle. Officer Schurr turned on his lights, signaling for Patrick to pull over. Instead of stopping immediately, Patrick drove for a short distance before finally coming to a stop in front of a house. Schurr later testified that this made him cautious, but nothing about Patrick's behavior suggested danger. When Schurr approached the driver's window and asked for his license, Patrick appeared confused and nervous, possibly because he had no valid license at the time. He stepped out of the car, looking unsure. Schurr told him several times to get back inside the vehicle. Patrick didn't. He stood beside the car, confused, asking, "What did I do wrong?" in a soft, accented voice.
Do you have a license? Do you have a license?
For what?
I'm stopping you. Do you have a license?
What done?
The officer repeated his instructions with growing frustration. The interaction was not violent, but it was tense. Patrick seemed overwhelmed, struggling to understand the words being thrown at him. Schurr told him the reason for the stop, the license plate issue, and said he needed to see Patrick's driver's license. Patrick looked around, hesitating, before turning and walking toward the passenger side of his own car, calling out to a passenger who had been quietly recording the scene on his phone. That brief move triggered Schurr's alarm. He grabbed Patrick's arm. Patrick pulled away, startled. What happened next was a fast and chaotic struggle. Schurr grabbed Patrick again, trying to force him to the hood of the car to handcuff him. Patrick resisted, twisting away. He didn't punch, attack, or threaten the officer. He was simply pulling himself free. The struggle moved onto the lawn as the rain soaked their clothing. Schurr radioed, "Stop resisting," trying to maintain control, but Patrick kept slipping from his grip. As the fight intensified, Patrick managed to break away for a moment and ran a few steps. Schurr lunged after him. The 2 men wrestled on the wet grass. It wasn't a fight between equals. Schurr was armed and trained, while Patrick was just trying to escape the officer's grasp. At one point, Schurr's taser slid out during the struggle. Patrick grabbed the device with one hand, not to attack, but seemingly to push it away. He never pointed it at the officer. He never fired it. But the sight of Patrick's hand on the taser changed everything. Officer Schurr's voice rose. He yelled at Patrick repeatedly to drop the taser. But the fight was messy, their bodies tangled, and the rain made everything more slippery. Patrick didn't swing the taser or use it. He held it loosely, confused and desperate. The passenger filming the encounter continued recording as the officer and Patrick fell to the ground again. Schurr wrestled Patrick onto his stomach, pinning him down with his weight. Patrick's hands were under his chest, and he struggled to breathe. Then, in a moment that would define the entire case, Schurr reached for his gun with his free hand. He pressed the cold metal muzzle to the back of Patrick's head. Patrick was face down, unarmed except for the taser he wasn't using. He wasn't attacking, he was pinned beneath the officer. A single gunshot echoed across the neighborhood. Patrick Lyoya went silent. Schurr stood up quickly, backing away slightly, breathing heavily. The passenger cried out in shock. Neighbors emerged from their homes. Sirens began to fill the air. But Patrick didn't move again. The bullet had ended his life instantly. The body cam footage, dash cam video, and cell phone recording spread across social media within hours. The reaction was immediate and explosive. People across the country questioned why lethal force was used on a man who was already pinned down. They pointed out that Patrick never threatened the officer, never swung the taser, never tried to reach for a weapon. All he did was resist arrest, something many experts argue should not lead to death. Protests erupted in Grand Rapids. Community members held vigils and marches chanting Patrick's name. Human rights groups demanded accountability. His family, still grieving from their past in the Congo, said they had escaped violence only for their son to be killed in America by someone meant to protect him. As the investigation unfolded, Officer Schurr was placed on leave and later charged with second-degree murder. Prosecutors argued that he used deadly force without justification and violated basic training protocols. They pointed out that shooting someone in the back of the head at point-blank range, especially when that person is face down, is considered excessive in nearly all policing standards. The defense argued that Schurr feared Patrick could gain control of the taser and potentially incapacitate him. They insisted that even if Patrick didn't intend to use the taser, the situation was chaotic and unpredictable. They framed Schurr's actions as split-second decision-making, not murder. The trial generated intense emotions on both sides. Experts testified about police training, resistance, and the dangers officers face. Others countered that officers must have restraint, especially when a suspect is unarmed and pinned. Videos were played repeatedly to examine every movement, every word, every second that passed before the fatal shot. But beyond the courtroom, the human story remained at the center. Patrick Lyoya wasn't just a name in the news. He was a son, a brother, a father, and a friend. His journey from a war-torn region to the United States was supposed to be the beginning of a safer life. Instead, it ended in a violent encounter over a minor traffic offense. His death raised critical questions. Should resisting arrest be treated like a death sentence? Why was lethal force used when the officer was on top of the suspect? Why wasn't the taser simply taken from Patrick's hand instead of escalating to a gun? Many believe the case revealed serious flaws in police training and use of force policies. To this day, people still talk about the moment Officer Schurr pressed the gun to Patrick's head. For many, it symbolized a breakdown in policing, a moment where the line between control and excessive force was crossed in the most irreversible way. Patrick Lyoya's story is a tragic reminder of how quickly a routine traffic stop can spiral into deadly violence, especially when fear, confusion, and poor decisions collide. A mismatched license plate should have been a simple citation. Instead, it turned into a fatal struggle that left a family shattered and a city scarred. Patrick didn't have to die that day. The officer didn't have to pull the trigger. But both lives were changed forever, and the shock of that moment still echoes today in conversations about accountability, justice, and what truly qualifies as reasonable force in American policing. Number 4. Betty Shelby. On the evening of September 16, 2016, the sun was setting over Tulsa, Oklahoma, casting a warm glow across the city. Traffic was light, neighborhoods were quiet, and most people were settling into their Friday night routines. But on a deserted stretch of road, a disturbing encounter was about to unfold, one that would end with a man's life taken during what should have been a basic roadside check. 40-year-old Terrence Crutcher was driving his white SUV when it suddenly stalled in the middle of the road. He wasn't speeding, running from anyone, or causing trouble. His car simply broke down. Terrence, a father of 4 and a college student at the time, stepped out of the vehicle to figure out what was wrong. He walked slowly, hands occasionally lifted in confusion as he tried to understand why his SUV wouldn't move. A 911 caller driving past noticed the stalled car and reported it. The caller described the vehicle as abandoned and mentioned a man walking away from it. Nothing suggested violence or a threat, just a broken-down car and a driver looking for help. But when Officer Betty Shelby arrived at the scene minutes later, she saw something different. She saw danger. Shelby had been responding to an unrelated domestic violence case nearby. As she drove, she noticed Terrence's SUV sitting partly in the road. When she approached, she claimed she saw Terrence behaving strangely. In her statement, she described him as zoned out, not following instructions, and reaching into his pockets. She would later say she believed he was under the influence of drugs. But video footage later showed that Terrence never acted aggressively. He didn't rush her or threaten her. He just looked confused and frustrated, like someone dealing with a car that wouldn't start. Shelby drew her weapon as she gave him commands. Terrence raised his hands high above his head, showing he wasn't hiding anything. He walked slowly toward his SUV, hands still raised, moving in a way that seemed cautious rather than threatening. The moment was captured from 2 angles, dashcam video and footage from a police helicopter hovering above. Both would become central pieces of evidence later. More officers arrived, including a taser-trained officer who aimed the stun device at Terrence while Shelby continued pointing her gun. The officers shouted different commands. Terrence kept his hands visible, still walking toward the driver's side of his SUV. He wasn't running. He wasn't resisting. He wasn't acting violently. He simply walked to his car with his hands up. As Terrence reached the driver's door, he placed his hands on the window. In that moment, just seconds before the gunshot, there was no sudden movement that suggested he was reaching for a weapon, no quick turn, no aggressive gesture. His hands were on the car. That's when everything changed. A taser fired. At the same exact moment, Officer Betty Shelby fired a single bullet into Terrence's chest. The timing was so close that many people believed both shots happened simultaneously. Terrence's body jerked and collapsed instantly to the pavement. Blood spread across the road. Officers rushed forward, handcuffed him, and looked toward the SUV. One of the helicopter officers was heard saying, "He looks like a bad dude," a statement that sparked outrage later because Terrence had done nothing to deserve such a description. As Terrence lay on the ground bleeding, no officer immediately provided medical aid. Minutes passed. He was later pronounced dead in the hospital. His family received the news that their son and father was gone, killed during a moment where he was clearly trying to cooperate. When the videos were released, the reaction was explosive. In the footage, Terrence Crutcher is seen with his hands up almost the entire time. He never lunges at the officers. He never pulls out a weapon. In fact, no weapon was ever found on him or in his SUV. His windows were rolled up, making it impossible for him to reach inside the car, even if he wanted to. Officers on the scene claimed that Shelby acted out of fear. They said Terrence didn't follow every command and that his behavior made her think he might be dangerous. But experts reviewing the footage saw something completely different. They saw a man cooperating. They saw a man walking slow, hands visible, not resisting. They saw no justification for lethal force. Shelby later argued in court that she believed Terrence was reaching into the SUV for a weapon. But again, the windows were closed. The videos proved he couldn't have reached inside. If anything, he was trying to rest his hands on the car to show he wasn't a threat. But Shelby's fear, claimed to be fueled by his size and behavior, overrode the facts in that moment. The case went to trial. The charge, first-degree manslaughter. Prosecutors argued that Shelby acted recklessly and that she allowed fear to guide her decision instead of proper training. They pointed out that another officer had been ready to deploy a taser, a non-lethal option, and that Shelby fired her gun even as the taser officer pulled the trigger. They argued that Terrence posed no danger. But the defense focused heavily on Shelby's perception. They said she genuinely believed Terrence was reaching for something inside the SUV. They said she followed her training based on the threat she believed she saw. They emphasized that police officers often must make quick decisions in moments of high stress. In May 2017, the jury returned a verdict, not guilty. The decision split the community. Terrence's family cried in the courtroom, devastated that the officer who killed him walked free. Activists in Tulsa marched and protested, calling the verdict another failure of the justice system. Many people around the nation saw the case as an example of how easily a black driver can be perceived as a threat, even when cooperating with raised hands. After the verdict, Shelby returned to work briefly, but later resigned. She went on to teach law enforcement classes, a decision that sparked controversy. Terrence's family, meanwhile, continued fighting for justice, launching campaigns to raise awareness about police use of force and the treatment of unarmed black men. The killing of Terrence Crutcher is tragic because it shows how quickly fear and assumptions can turn a calm situation into a deadly one. A stalled car should have ended with a tow truck, not a death. Terrence was unarmed, non-violent, and clearly trying to show he wasn't dangerous. But in the end, none of that protected him. His death became another painful example of the gap between what officers perceive and what actually happens. For many people, the image of Terrence walking with his hands raised, slowly, peacefully, remains one of the strongest symbols of why police reform is still desperately needed. Terrence Crutcher didn't get justice in the courtroom, but his name continues to echo across conversations about accountability, race, and the deadly consequences of fear in policing. Number 5. Ray Tensing. On July 19, 2015, a warm summer evening in Cincinnati, Ohio, turned into a deadly tragedy during what should have been one of the simplest interactions in policing, a basic traffic stop for a missing front license plate. 43-year-old Samuel DuBose was driving his green Honda Accord near the University of Cincinnati campus. He wasn't speeding, wasn't swerving, and wasn't putting anyone in danger. He was simply heading to visit his girlfriend when University of Cincinnati police officer Ray Tensing noticed that Sam's car didn't have a front license plate. Tensing activated his lights and pulled Sam over. Everything that followed happened in less than 2 minutes, just 120 seconds that would end a man's life and send shockwaves across the country. Sam was a father, a musician, a jokester, and someone who loved making people laugh. His family often described him as soft-spoken and gentle. That evening, he was calm when Officer Tensing approached the driver's window. Body cam footage captured Sam greeting the officer politely, even with a smile. Tensing asked for Sam's driver's license. Sam admitted he didn't have it on him. He handed over a bottle of gin he had in his car, explaining it wasn't open. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't hostile. But Tensing seemed suspicious from the start. As the officer continued questioning Sam, the tone shifted. Tensing asked repeatedly for Sam's driver's license and kept pressing him about where he was coming from. Sam tried to remain calm, but there was a growing tension in his voice, the kind that comes from knowing your interaction with police can go wrong at any moment. He told Tensing he wasn't doing anything wrong and that he had only forgotten his license at home. What happened next was fast and disturbing. Tensing ordered Sam to remove his seatbelt. Sam looked confused and asked why. The officer repeated the command, voice rising. Sam didn't immediately comply, likely fearing he was about to be pulled out of the car. Within a second, Tensing reached for the door with one hand while holding a gun in the other. Sam turned the ignition slightly, not to speed away, but to reposition his car, something shown clearly in the video and later confirmed by forensic examiners. But Tensing suddenly yelled, "Stop! Stop!" He took a step backward and fired a single bullet directly into Sam's head at point-blank range. Sam's head dropped instantly. His car rolled forward slowly, drifting across the street until it crashed into a curb. He died behind the wheel, hands limp, blood staining his white t-shirt. Tensing fell backward as he fired, then jumped up and ran after the car with his weapon still raised. Into the radio, he shouted words that would later prove to be lies. "Shots fired! He dragged me!" He repeated it again. "He dragged me with the car." Within minutes, other officers arrived. They taped off the scene, checked the car, and eventually pronounced Samuel Dubose dead. Tensing stood by his cruiser, breathing hard, insisting that his life had been in danger. But the problem was simple. The body cam video proved he wasn't telling the truth. The footage became one of the clearest and most disturbing examples of an unjustified police shooting ever captured. The video showed Sam's car barely moving before Tensing fired. The officer was not dragged. He was not trapped. His life was not in danger. Instead, he fired just as Sam slightly turned his car key, a movement experts later said was nowhere near enough to pull the officer or pose a threat. When the footage became public, Cincinnati exploded with outrage. People marched in the streets, calling Sam's death an execution. City officials reacted quickly. The Hamilton County prosecutor reviewed the video and made a historic decision. Officer Ray Tensing would be charged with murder and voluntary manslaughter. During the press conference announcing the charges, prosecutor Joe Dieters didn't hold back. He said the shooting was senseless, asinine, and that Tensing purposely killed Sam. Dieters said Sam had done nothing to threaten the officer and that the video was worse than any police shooting he had ever seen. The trial was intense. Prosecutors argued that Tensing acted out of impatience, fear, and anger, not danger. They explained that the body cam footage showed no dragging and no threat. They showed how Tensing fired the gun instantly, without giving Sam a chance to respond. They emphasized that Sam's car barely moved until after he was shot and slumped over. The defense tried desperately to argue that Tensing feared for his life. They brought in experts who claimed Tensing could have believed he was about to be dragged, even if he wasn't. They argued that the officer acted out of perception, not reality. But the video contradicted them at nearly every turn. Sam's family sat through every day of the trial, listening to arguments, watching the footage again and again. They cried quietly, holding each other for strength. Sam's mother spoke about how her son avoided violence and never wanted trouble. She said no one deserves to die over a missing license plate. The first trial ended in a hung jury. So did the second. Both groups of jurors struggled to agree unanimously, even though most said the shooting was unnecessary and wrong. Some jurors felt the officer may have panicked but didn't intend to kill. Others felt the killing was intentional. Without full agreement, neither trial produced a conviction. After the second mistrial, prosecutors made the painful decision not to try Tensing a third time. The community protested. Sam's family felt crushed, but legally, the system had reached a dead end. In 2020, a federal civil suit ended with the University of Cincinnati paying Sam's family a $4.85 million settlement, one of the largest in the city's history. The university also disbanded or restructured parts of its campus police, admitting that major reforms were necessary. Sam's death left a deep scar in Cincinnati. His friends remembered his smile, his jokes, his music, and the way he loved his children. They said he wasn't perfect, But he didn't deserve to die the way he did, killed instantly over something as small as a missing license plate. The tragedy sparked national conversations about police use of force, body cameras, and why so many routine traffic stops become deadly for black drivers. It raised the question, why do minor violations lead to life-ending encounters? And what would have happened to Sam's case if that body cam footage didn't exist? To this day, people still refer to the Samuel Dubose case as one of the clearest examples of an unjustified, fear-driven police shooting. The video doesn't leave room for doubt. Sam wasn't violent, he wasn't armed, he wasn't fleeing at high speed. A gun was fired because an officer panicked and lied about being dragged. Sam's story remains a painful reminder that sometimes the only thing standing between justice and silence is a camera, and a community willing to speak out. Number 6. Roy Oliver. This is the story of a police officer who opened fire on a car full of teenagers who were simply trying to leave a party. A shooting that never should have happened. A case that shook the community of Balch Springs, Texas, and led to one of the rare moments in American history where an on-duty police officer was convicted of murder. The officer at the center of this tragedy is Roy Oliver. It happened on the night of April 29, 2017. There was a house party in Balch Springs where many teenagers gathered. 15-year-old Jordan Edwards was one of them. He was described as polite, respectful, athletic, and always smiling. His teachers loved him, his friends loved him, his family adored him. He had dreams of going to college, playing football, and making his parents proud. But that night, everything changed. Around 11 p.m., someone in the neighborhood called 911 to report possible underage drinking. 2 officers responded, Officer Roy Oliver and his partner, Officer Tyler Gross. When they arrived, the party was already calming down. Teenagers were leaving, talking, laughing, and trying to get home before curfew. There were no signs of violence, no weapons, no chaos. Just kids heading out. Oliver and Gross entered the house to look for the homeowner. As they walked through the party, everything seemed normal. But suddenly, they heard what sounded like gunshots outside. In reality, it wasn't gunfire. It was the sound of nearby cars speeding over bumps on the road. But the officers mistook it for shots being fired, and instantly, panic set in. Teenagers began running away from the area, not because they did anything wrong, but because they heard police shouting. Jordan Edwards and his older brother got into their car with 2 friends. Jordan sat in the passenger seat. His brother, who was driving, was trying to leave safely. Officer Gross ran toward the car, yelling commands. He smashed the passenger side window with his gun, trying to get the teens to stop, but the boys were terrified. They thought the officers were angry and did not understand what they wanted. So Jordan's brother did what anyone would do. He drove away. But here is the most important part. The car was driving away from the officers, not toward them, not threatening them, moving away. Despite this, Officer Roy Oliver grabbed his patrol rifle, raised it, and fired 5 shots into the moving car. 1 bullet struck Jordan Edwards in the head. The car kept moving until Jordan's brother realized his little brother was slumped over, bleeding. He pulled over and tried to get help, but it was too late. Jordan Edwards was pronounced dead. Almost immediately, the police department released a statement claiming the car was reversing aggressively toward the officers. The officers feared for their lives. They fired to protect themselves, but body camera footage proved all of it was false. The car was moving forward, away from the scene. No threat, no aggression, no justification for shooting. When the footage came out, the police department fired Roy Oliver. A murder investigation began. The community demanded justice. Jordan's family said he was a straight A student, a loving brother, a quiet, kind boy, someone who never caused trouble. His father cried during interviews, saying, "My son didn't deserve this. He did everything right." The case went to trial in August 2018. It was emotional, tense, and followed closely across the country. Many experts said it was extremely rare for an officer to face murder charges, and even rarer for a jury to convict. But the evidence was overwhelming. The car was driving away. No one in the car had a weapon Oliver fired without being in danger. Body camera footage contradicted Oliver's story. During the trial, Jordan's teachers, friends, and coaches described him as one of the brightest students they had ever met. His football coach said he was the type of kid everyone wanted on their team. Oliver's partner, Officer Gross, even testified that he did not fear for his life at that moment and did not believe deadly force was necessary. On August 28, 2018, the jury found Roy Oliver guilty of murder. The next day, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. Prosecutors had asked for 60 years. But Jordan's family felt grateful that the officer was convicted at all, something that rarely happens. Jordan's father said, "No sentence can bring Jordan back, but at least there is accountability." As of April 2025, Roy Oliver has served about 6.5 years of his 15-year sentence. He is incarcerated at the James J. Lynock unit in Texas. Because Texas law allows early release after serving half the sentence, Oliver may be eligible for parole soon. Jordan's family still visits his grave. His college dreams remain unfulfilled. His smile is now only a memory. And all because an officer fired into a car that was simply driving away. A split-second decision that stole a child's life and devastated a community.